Hey everyone, it's Nurse Sarah, and in this video, I'm going to be going over parenteral versus enteral nutrition. And as always, whenever you get done watching this video, you can access the free quiz that will test you on this content. So let's get started. Parenteral and enteral nutrition are used whenever patients cannot meet their own nutritional needs through normal eating. And there's various reasons why these types of nutritions need to be ordered. One huge reason is because a patient has impaired swallowing. It is just unsafe for them to swallow. If they try to swallow food, it could go into their lungs, hence aspirate and cause pneumonia and a lot of other complications. Now, when could this happen? Well, if a patient has had some severe stroke or they have a neurodegenerative disease like ALS, a severe form of Parkinson's. These types of nutrition can also be used if the patient has a gastrointestinal disease like Crohn's, they're having some malabsorption issues, they have some type of facial trauma, or they're experiencing severe malnutrition. Now let's take a deeper look at these two types of nutrition. So a lot of people get these two terms confused, parenteral and enteral, and it's totally understandable why, because these words look so similar. However, if you take a closer look at the word, it can help you remember which one is which. So each of these words share the word enteral in them. And enteral just means it's referring to the gastrointestinal tract / intestines. However, whenever we throw three little letters in front of that word, PAR, it changes the meaning. PAR typically means beyond, outside. So whenever we're saying parenteral, we're talking about giving nutrition outside the intestines, hence the gastrointestinal tract. But with enteral, what we're talking about that gastrointestinal tract. And when we're talking about nutrition, we're giving it through the intestines specifically. Now, why would you use one nutrition over the other? Well, the most preferred route would be your enteral because you're giving it straight to the gastrointestinal tract. And that is the way that humans are designed to absorb or take in nutrients, is through our GI tract. However, that's not always the case with some patients. They have a lot of things going on. They may have some malabsorption issues where they're not absorbing the nutrients through the GI tract. So you can give it to them all day long like that and it's not going to work. Or let's say they have where their GI tract just is not functioning. And this could be in cases like paralytic ileus. What that means is that their intestines are literally paralyzed. They're not moving. So everything you give them is just going to sit there. Or they have some type of blood flow issue where they have ischemia going on, or they may just have some complete bowel obstruction. We would not want to do that route. Instead, we would want to tap into their bloodstream to give that nutrition. So we're going to give it outside the intestine. So what you want to remember with this is that sometimes patients are going to be started on a parenteral form of nutrition, and then they'll be slowly transitioned to enteral, or we may put them back on oral intake. It really depends on what's going on with your patient. So first, let's talk about parenteral. We've already established that we're giving this nutrition outside the intestines. We're not even going to use that system at all. Instead, this nutrition is going to be delivered into the bloodstream directly. Now, how are we going to do this? Well, we are going to do this intravenously. And this can be done several ways. One way is through a peripheral line. And when we do this, it's known as peripheral parenteral nutrition. We call it PPN, so much easier to say. Or we can give it through a central line, and whenever we do this, it's called total parenteral nutrition, also known for short as TPN. Now, whenever we administer this way, there are some risks associated with that, and we're going to go over that in depth. But some of the risks are hyperglycemia, making that blood sugar way too high in the blood, infection, fluid and electrolyte imbalance, rebound hypoglycemia, and refeeding syndrome. So now let's take a more in-depth look at PPN and TPN. So we've already established that these are intravenous nutritional support solutions for your patient. And these solutions are hypertonic, meaning they are concentrated, especially because they contain a lot of dextrose in them, hence glucose, along with vitamins, amino acids, lipids, and electrolytes. And TPN is going to have our highest osmolarity of the two. So with PPN, this is going to provide your patient with partial nutritional support. It's less concentrated, than the TPN, as I pointed out earlier. Therefore, it's typically safe to give in a peripheral line. However, you still want to be careful because it is still hypertonic, and if it leaks into the tissues, it could cause damage. So always be making sure that you are checking your site. Because it provides partial nutritional support for your patient, it's only for the short term because it gives your patient a limited amount of calories. TPN is going to provide complete nutrition to your patient. And because it's providing that complete nutrition to them, it means it's going to be very concentrated. It's going to have a high osmolarity, especially all the glucose in it. And due to this, we have to give this through a central line. That's a safe way to give it. It's usually going to be given in the superior vena cava because this is a nice large vein that has a large blood flow. So as that TPN drips into that vein, it's going to be rapidly diluted. So again, I just want to drive home that point. You really want to monitor your sites because if these solutions leak into the tissues, it can cause significant tissue damage. Now, some other complications that can happen from these therapies include a condition known as rebound hypoglycemia. And why is this? Well, this is going to typically happen whenever the patient is abruptly stopped from these therapies, especially TPN. And why does this occur? Well, it occurs because, as I pointed out with especially TPN, it has such a high amount of dextrose, hence glucose in it. So your body is receiving this continuous glucose and it's adapting to that by increasing the insulin secretion. Because how insulin works is it's a hormone that helps take glucose that's in the blood inside the cell. However, if we just stop that patient cold turkey from receiving that solution that has all that glucose, you're left with this high insulin level. The body just can't immediately react. So that insulin is still high, however, the glucose supply has dropped. Therefore, whenever insulin goes to access that glucose, there won't be too much in the blood. Instead, it'll take what is left over in the blood, will take it, move it into the cell, and it'll take it out of the blood and drop the glucose in the blood, leading to hypoglycemia. So it's very important that these patients are tapered off of these solutions. Now, another thing you want to remember is during therapy, these solutions can increase glucose, it can drop the glucose. Therefore, you're going to be monitoring their glucose level per your facility's protocol around the clock, even in patients who are not diabetic. Another complication that can occur is known as refeeding syndrome. Now, this can happen not only with parenteral nutrition, especially TPN, but it can also happen with enteral feedings. And this is because the feedings were given too quickly. And over here with parenteral is just way too much glucose being dumped in the patient too rapidly. And the reason that it can affect patients is that they haven't had nutrition for a really long time. So whenever a patient hasn't had nutrition for a long time, their body tries to survive. And how it does that, it goes into starvation mode. So with starvation mode starting out at the beginning, it's going to use the glucose. And then once that really runs out, it'll switch to using proteins and fats for energy. And its whole goal is to keep those vital organs going and maintaining just enough electrolyte levels in the blood so your body can survive, particularly potassium, magnesium, and phosphate. And how it's going to achieve that is it's going to pull those stores of that nutrients from inside the cell and just put a little bit in the blood just to keep things going. So if you check this patient who hasn't had nutrition for a long time, you look at their blood serum, those levels can look normal or mildly low, and it's really deceptive because it's not telling you the true picture of what's going on with your patient. So if you all of a sudden quickly introduce this nutrition to them, either route, and you don't do it slowly, what can happen is you cause this insulin surge in this patient. And that insulin is going to, we know it drives glucose in the cells, but it's also going to drive potassium, magnesium, and especially phosphate from that blood there's not a lot in the blood already rapidly into that cell, and it's going to drop that level. So a big hallmark of this refeeding syndrome is you're going to see severe hypophosphatemia, and that's where that phosphate level just plummets in the blood. And that's particularly dangerous because it can cause neuromuscular issues. It can cause seizures, respiratory failure, and heart failure. Therefore, to prevent this syndrome, it's really important that we start these patients out slowly and gradually to prevent these sudden shifts of these electrolytes. Now let's go over enteral nutrition. So we've already established that this is nutrition that we're going to give through the intestine. So we're directly giving it into that GI tract. And how we achieve this is through a special tube. And there's a wide variety of tubes on the market that can be used to do this. Now in my next video, I'm going to go over those individual tubes and all the nitty-gritty you need to know for exams. But here I want to do just a quick overview of it. Here we have large bore tubes. Notice we have the blue little pigtail and then the clear part. This is known as the Salem sump tube. It is hence called large bore because it's really thick and stiff. It can be inserted through the nose, down through the esophagus, and hang out into the stomach. This tube, because it is large, is really good mainly at removing air and gastric contents from the stomach, but if need be, it can be used to give the patient some liquid nutrition or medication for the short term. Then we have small bore tubes, and notice this is the yellow tube here. It's a lot smaller than our large bore one. These are thinner and flexible. They're a lot more comfortable for your patient, and we can give them the liquid nutrition through this. One thing that is good about this tube, you may also hear them be referred to as a Dobhoff tube. Some of them are weighted, so they can be placed in the stomach, but they can also be placed in the duodenum or duodenum, however you want to say it, and the jejunum. It just changes their name a little bit. Then we have surgical tubes. This is where it's going to be placed through the skin. It can be placed directly into the stomach, or it can be placed into the jejunum, or you can have a combination of a tube, like a gastrojejunostomy tube. So whatever tube we have, it's going to bypass that chewing and swallowing. However, in order to use these type of ways to give the patient nutrition, you have to have a GI system that is working, hence functioning. Now these tubes can have various names, and it really depends on how the tube was inserted and where it ended up. So some ways it can be inserted, one way is through the nose. So with the nose tubes, you don't want to do that on patients who've had like a severe skull injury, like a basilar skull injury, or they have esophageal varices or some type of issue going on up here in this region, because it could be really dangerous to insert the tube. But tubes that can be inserted, we have an NG tube. That stands for nasogastric. So the first part of the word is naso. That was inserted up through the nose, and then gastric is where it ended up. It ended up down in the stomach. So that could be a large bore or a small bore tube. And then we have an ND. This is the nasoduodenal tubes. This means it was inserted up through the nose and it ended up in the duodenum. That is going to be your small bore tubes. And then we have jejunum, the nasal jejunal tubes. That's the NJ. Again, it's a lot like the ND. It went up through the nose down, but ended up into the jejunum. They can also be placed through the skin, and these are typically going to be long-term, so your patient's going to have them for quite a while. Some common ones include the gastrostomy tube, known as the G tube. Let the name of the tube again help you. The ostomy tells you a surgical opening was created and it was placed in the stomach. That's what gastro means. And then we have a jejunostomy. This is also known as a J tube, which is so much easier to say. And this J tube is setting in the jejunum. And then we have where they can be placed through the mouth. These aren't quite as common, but they may be common in patients who have injury to their nose, or they're intubated, or they're a neonate. So the tube will go through the mouth and then go down the esophagus and go into the stomach. So orogastric. However, with these, you have to watch out for the patient biting down on the tube or gagging on the tube. Now, just like over here, there's a lot of risk that you have to watch out for with these tubes. And some big risks that you have to watch out for with these tubes, number one being aspiration. This is where your patient is getting maybe the liquid nutrition or medications you're giving them, where instead it's supposed to go into their stomach, but it's not, it's ending up in their lungs. A lot of times this happens because that tube has moved. It's not where it was originally supposed to be. So always check placement. Or maybe the head of the bed is not at 30 to 45 degree angle where it needs to be during feedings. So that can cause that. Now, whenever that happens, it will enter the lungs. It can cause pneumonia and cause a lot of other complications. Also, another complication is clogging. These tubes like to clog, especially the small bore tubes. They're notorious for clogging, and the surgical tubes can clog as well. So you always want to make sure you're following flushing protocols. They can become dislodged, particularly the surgical tubes, or your patient may get confused and pull that tube out of their nose. No one wants a tube hanging in their nose, not comfortable. And they can get diarrhea. This is a complication from the feeding itself. So monitor your patient for diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting. That could be signaling to you that they're not tolerating their tube feeding very well, or it's just too much for their GI tract and maybe they need to be adjusted. There can be infection at the site, big complication with the surgical tubes because it can leak out gastric contents, which is very toxic to your skin, and that can cause infection. So always monitoring your insertion sites. Pressure injuries are a big one, especially with your tubes up here at the nose. You want to be checking the nose, and if they have it inserted orally, you want to be checking for pressure injury there. And again, refeeding syndrome can happen, so always go slow and gradual with your feedings. Okay, so that wraps up this review. Now, if you're studying GI Med-Surg nursing and you want some more resources to help you prep for your exams, I have some digital notes that you can check out that will cover a whole bunch of GI topics, and you can get those at nursesarah.com.